What's good, Rip City? Brendan Slaughter here on the Rip City Drive here on a Thursday afternoon. The Indiana Pacers shocked the New York Knicks in overtime 138-135 as Tyrese Halliburton hits a fadeaway shot to force overtime before the Pacers took it home and hold a 1-0 lead. Tyrese led the way for the Pacers with 31 and 11. New York was led by the 43 from Jalen Brunson. Game 2 Western Conference Finals tonight. Thunder hosting the Minnesota Timberwolves up 1-0. Tip-off at 5:30 on ESPN. Trailblazers forward Toumani Camara has been named to the All-NBA Defensive Second Team. It is the first All-Defensive nod for a Portland Trailblazer since 2003, 2004. Theo Ratliff. Crazy. The College Football Playoff has approved a new seeding model for next season where the top four teams will be the top four seeds with byes. And the Denver Nuggets have removed the interim tag from interim head coach David Adelman. Coming up on the big show, we'll catch up with Brad Botkin in our first hour. We'll catch up with Sean Highkin, hour number 2. Welcoming you into the Rip City Drive here on a Thursday. Nah, Morgan, we love the way you talk. Keep that rolling. Good stuff here on a Thursday. Pleased to be back on the Rip City Drive with you guys. Hope everyone had a good day so far. Hillsborough Hops action was on this earlier this afternoon. Rich Burke, Matt Rickard were on the call. Hope everyone that checked in enjoyed the Hops game. They're going to be looking to get back in the win column tomorrow, but we got a couple hours of radio to do here on a Thursday. Very excited for our lineup today. We're going to catch up with Brad Botkin from CBS Sports here in about 20 minutes. Talking with Brad, just got to obviously dive into the game last night. Got to dive into both games. Very excited to talk NBA with Brad, and, also got to get his thoughts on Toumani Camara being named all defensive second team. Again, folks, I'm not one for adding up, just little things to make a point, but when we talked earlier in the week, Donovan Clingan was the first all rookie honors for Trailblazers since Damian Lillard in 2014 or 2013-14, excuse me. And then you go back to this, where now today, first time Portland's had someone on the all defensive team in over 20 years. Like Theo Ratliff and and that group, like that's some of my earliest like Blazer memories, folks. I know I'm the ripe age of 29 years old, but like, man, Theo Ratliff was a minute ago. 2003-04 was a minute ago. So absolutely credit to two. I hope it's well deserved. He is a absolute stud on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, he's a stud all the way around. I'm very excited to see where Toumani Camara is going to grow. But again, as we've said for a little over a year on this program now, how about Joe Cronin and that staff for getting Toumani Camara in the Damian Lillard deal? He seemed like a throw-in at the time, but man, oh man, to get the wing, have a wing like Toumani Camara, not only one, but then add Denny Avdia, man, you've got some promising wings for the future. I'm very excited about that. So again, credit to Toumani Camara for taking home all defensive hardware. The kid absolutely deserves it. Works his butt off on defense and doesn't miss many games either. He's tough as nails. So you definitely love to see that. So we'll talk a little bit about that with Brad Botkin in hour 2. We'll also get Sean Highkin's thoughts as he's going to join us in studio for the entire third hour. But folks, we have to start with the big news of the day. And that was obviously Tyrese Halliburton. My goodness. I mean, we talked about it going into the series, folks, how, where did that underrated talk come from? How could anybody say, or excuse me, overrated? How could anybody say that Tyrese Halliburton is overrated after what he did last night? I mean, wow. I mean, the Pacers, the game went about as what I expected it to. I thought they'd play a really close, good game, and I thought the Knicks would ultimately have a little bit more and be in a position to take game 1. Whether or not you want to say it was a Knicks collapse, a Pacers great game, I lean more towards the collapse, but you still have to have the players to make the plays to, come back and hit all the shots. And talk about the game of Aaron Naismith last night, too. I mean, there's just a lot of unsung heroes on the Indiana Pacers, and I think that's why I found myself gravitating towards them. You look at Tyrese Halliburton, he obviously had 31 points, but he had 11 assists. He is a pass-first point guard who can also score when needed, and man, he is just the secret sauce that makes that engine go. I mean, Rick Carlisle and this squad, they are fun to root for, man. And, not to say that the Knicks, the Thunder, or the Timberwolves, I think everyone's got a great story this year. I think everyone has a great story. But when you're specifically talking about the Pacers, I feel like they kind of are, occasionally get left in that mid to small market mediocrity. I mean, I don't think anyone particularly expected them to make the move for Pascal Siakam when they did. That's turned out to be a key move. For years and years, it was, oh, Miles Turner's not going to be here anymore. They want to trade Miles Turner. Miles Turner's still there, right? So I think the Pacers just quietly went about building their team their way. They knew the Kings had a player they wanted and fleeced them. I mean, let's be serious here. I mean, you had Miles Turner and Sabonis, and you didn't need both of them. They went and got Pascal Siakam to kind of fill that spot where Domantas Sabonis was, and you make that trade, and it looks genius now. I mean, it really does. I mean, at the time we were talking and saying it was one of those rare, maybe win-win trades when we saw Sacramento make the playoffs, light the beam, all that exciting stuff for the Kings. And then, we kind of see the Kings kind of revert back to being what we've expected from the Kings. So, I'm very curious to see ultimately how this series shakes out. But, it's a collapse. There's no way to talk about it, no way to say it otherwise. The Knicks absolutely collapsed in this game. Pacers took advantage. I want to hear from the Knicks and the Pacers post-game here. Let's go ahead and check out some audio. Let's go ahead and hear from Tom Thibodeau on whether or not he felt the team got loose in the last couple minutes.
Did you feel like guys got a little too loose in the final minutes offensively and a little sloppy with the ball?
Yeah, the turnovers were costly, and then they converted them into easy buckets, so that sort of fueled their offense. That's what got them going again. They started off the game, in a good rhythm, and then, we did much better as the half went on. And then, down the stretch, we didn't do what we needed to do.
That's Knicks head coach Tom Thibodeau. He also talked about how the Knicks will be looking to turn that disappointment, because, again, you talk about a game like that, it's an emotional loss, too. And he talked about how you're going to turn that disappointment into determination.
There's obviously disappointment when you fall short, but it doesn't. We have to take a look at the film, make our corrections, and then we got to change quickly for game two. We got to be ready for game two, and that's all you look at. So you have to take disappointment and turn that into more determination.
And again, the Pacers went into the Garden. Tyrese Halliburton had a pretty, emotional celebration with, the choking kind of, gesture, I should say. And, it's that emotion has the potential to absolutely ignite the Pacers and kind of leave a bit of a hollow feeling with the Knicks. Tom Thibodeau talked about how they can bounce back in game two.
Coach, what do you do going into game two Friday to bounce back from this? What do you tell your guys to put this behind them?
Yeah, same thing. There's a lot of emotional highs and lows in the playoffs. You got to bounce back quickly. You look at the film, make your corrections, get ready for game two. And that's, when you go into the playoffs, you lay out the plan of how you're going to approach the entire playoffs.
Knicks head coach Tom Thibodeau, again, still seems pretty confident, but obviously the Pacers did their job. They stole one in the Garden. So now, the series shifts. The Pacers now have the home court advantage, and, it's going to be up to the Knicks to, bounce back, in the next game. But Jalen Brunson had a huge game. He had 43 points, led the Knicks, and he talked a little bit after the game about, just their struggles closing the game out.
And how do you summarize, you guys had a 14-point lead with 2:51 left to go. How do you summarize how the game closed?
Can't really summarize it. Give them a lot of credit. They closed the game out like they've been doing it all playoffs. Just not really good on our part.
You can tell there's some frustration there, right? And there absolutely has to be. Jalen Brunson had a great game, and they let off the gas and let the Pacers back into the game. Let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk. Or rather, let's hear from Rick Carlisle and then ultimately Tyrese Halliburton. But let's start with Rick Carlisle talking about how Tyrese can do whatever he wants out there.
Players can do what they want, and it's an emotional thing. This is a difficult time of the year, so It's not a big deal to me. Tyrese is earning the right to do whatever he wants.
I mean, that's your coach standing up for. I mean, I didn't think the choking gesture was necessarily anything over the top. I mean, I kind of be surprised if he got fined for it. I think, that's kind of the beauty of sports. I mean, it wasn't anything vulgar or anything wrong. It was accurate of the situation. The Knicks kind of choked that game away. This was Tyrese Halliburton talking about his choke gesture.
I wasn't like plotting on it or anything. Everybody wanted me to do it like last year at some different point, but it's got to feel right. And it felt right at the time. If I would have known it was a 2, I would not have done it. So I think I might have wasted it. If I do it again, then people might say I'm like aura farming. So I'm not, I don't plan on using it again.
So it sounds like it's a bit of a one-hit wonder there for Tyrese. But I mean, imagine, if that ends up being kind of a springboard for the Pacers in this series. You'll look back and that could be one of, if not the moment for Tyrese Halliburton, as a player. And, that shot, was almost reminiscent of, Dame's three-pointer that he hit in the bubble that bounced straight up and then came straight down. It's really rare. It takes a lot of perfect geometry of the shooting of the ball for it to bounce straight up and then go down, obviously. Tyrese Halliburton was asked if he knew that shot was going in.
I knew I'm like, it's going in. It just felt like it got stuck up there, though, And honestly, when it, went in, I thought my eyes might have been deceiving me in the moment. But it felt good when it left my hand. So, I thought it was going to go in. And, the ball felt like it was up there for eternity. But, man, just a special moment.
I'm going to be very curious to see what the Pacers' response is now, too, because, again, I mentioned the Pacers do have some playoff experience and championship experience. Obviously, Rick Carlisle brings that. Pascal Siakam brings that. But the rest of the team, this is somewhat new to them, right? Especially big-time moments and big-time places. And it's a long series. Rick Carlisle, seeing what he's seen over his career, talked about how it is a long series and, they've got to stay focused.
This is day 1 of 13 days. Remarkable resilience by our guys, hanging in, finding a way to get the thing to overtime, and then made enough plays. But it's a long series. We're not going to get too excited about this. We got things to clean up. They got things to clean up. Game 2 is going to be another war.
And, that's somebody in Rick Carlisle who, like I said, he's got the championship experience. I mean, that title in Dallas, with Dirk and obviously having, Terry Stotts, Dwayne Casey on that staff. I mean, that's a very, it's a key title, right? And you think back to, Rick Carlisle's just massive amounts of experience. It's something that's going to help the Pacers in this. Not to say that Thibodeau doesn't have it too. He absolutely does. But if Rick Carlisle, after this win, can keep the Pacers on pace, not feeling too high about themselves, not staying too low, it's just getting right to that middle level, I really think they could have a chance in this series. I like the Knicks going into this series, but I knew the Pacers had more than a fighter's chance. Now that they took game 1, pressure is back on the Knicks to perform. So very curious to see. We'll obviously be talking with Brad Botkin here coming up. Want to get his thoughts on the series as well, his thoughts on Halliburton, and so much more. You got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter here on a Thursday. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on a Thursday. Brendan Slaughter filling in for Chad Doing. Hope everyone's having a great Thursday so far. Pleased to bring on our next guest. He's an NBA writer for CBS Sports. Brad Botkin on the show. Excited to talk some NBA with Brad. Brad, what's going on, my man? How are you?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Appreciate you making some time. Know we got some more games obviously coming up tonight, but lots of things I want to get into with you, Brad, but got to start with obviously the Pacers last night and Tyrese Halliburton. I mean, do you have words to describe that comeback? It's pretty crazy.
No, my editor asked me the same thing afterward. He had come up with some words, write an article, and it really kind of defies logic because of how often this keeps happening, and we're not seeing this just in this series or just with this teams. Like the amount of, call it statistically improbable events in these playoffs has been astounding, from Aaron Gordon's 2 buzzer beaters to all 4 home higher seeds losing game 1 of the conference semis. These are like parlays that would never hit. The Pacers have won 3 games while trailing by at least 7 points inside the final minute. You're talking about having that happen one time. It's like a 1 in 3,000 chance. I mean, I've done the research on this. These things over historically, you're talking about they've happened once or twice in the entire play-by-play era since '97. Now they've happened 3 times to the Pacers. It's the 3rd time they've come back from 7 down. No team in NBA history. I think they're 994-0 is what I want to say the record is when teams are down 14 with 2.5 minutes to play in the play-by-play era, '97. I mean, come on, this stuff doesn't happen. And the Knicks, the thing is, they've benefited from the same thing. 2 20-point comebacks back-to-back against the Celtics never happened in NBA history. Never 2 20-point comebacks in the fourth quarter of a playoff in 2 consecutive playoff games. Never happened. 21-0 run against Detroit in game 1 in the first round. That's almost never happened. A fourth quarter run 3 times in like 2,880 playoff games, something like that. It's right around those numbers. Has there been a run of 21-0 in the fourth quarter of a playoff game? Like, these things never happen, and they just keep happening. So in one breath, it's like the Knicks were kind of, live by the crazy comeback, die by the crazy comeback. They've sort of gotten this far on extremely improbable comebacks on their own side, and they finally got burnt by that fire last night.
Catching up with Brad Botkin here from CBS Sports. So in a way, Brad, what we're saying is these NBA playoffs are drunk. Like, there's just no rhyme or reason.
They're drunk in the best way, the good way. The way you feel good, you're buzzed. It's like you're in college and you're not like out of control. Like, it's actually just like more entertaining. The good drunk. I'm for this.
Oh yeah, no, I am as well. And just kind of zeroing in on that game last night. I mean, I think more people, and here's kind of the thing, Brad, is I can't say we watch here on the West Coast a ton of Pacers games throughout the year, but very familiar with Tyrese Halliburton. And, I remember a couple weeks ago when that whole overrated thing started with Tyrese Halliburton. How did that start? And, that's got to be quieted now. I mean, he is almost taking it personally.
Well, it's an anonymous players poll is how it started, and ESPN runs these, and they go and they do these straw polls, and they do them for MVPs, and they do them and they tend to ask these types of questions. And one of them is always, who's the most overrated player in the league? And Halliburton's name came up. And the fact that it came from his fellow players, that's going to sting. These guys, I think all of us, if it came from your peers, it would sting a little bit. But, these guys are hyper competitive, hyper prideful. So, he's been pretty petty about it in the media, and I think rightfully so. Tyrese Halliburton, to call him overrated, I would actually call Halliburton one of the most underrated players for the reason that you just said. I don't think a lot of people watch enough of him. I think if he was playing for the Lakers or the Knicks, I think this guy would be an even bigger star. He's an incredible player. He's a throwback point guard in the sense that he creates the right pace in the half court and the full court. He gets everybody involved. He's a sensational passer. He senses spacing. He senses matchups. All of these things that like traditional point guards are are supposed to do, organize the game, get the right person the ball in the right matchup or the right spot on the floor and do this over and over and over, and consistency wins out. He does all that, but he does it with this modern flair. He does things that go against the grain. He jumps before he passes. He's got a funky-looking jump shot, but he can get four of them in a row, and he can rattle it off with the confidence of Steph Curry. So he's this beautiful, beautiful blend of throwback foundational principles of point guard play with a modern flair to his game. And there's, to me, when he's cooking and he's confident and he's getting the whole team involved and they're running and they're spacing, there's not really a more fun team to watch. And a lot of people, I think, are getting acquainted with that now as the Pacers go deeper in the playoffs and they start watching a little bit more of them.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm kind of one of those people, Brad. Like, when they took out the Bucks, in the first round, I'm like, okay, obviously Dame's injury, and then kind of my eyes perked up when they took out the Cavs. The way that they took out the Cavs, I'm like, okay, I think we need to pay attention to what Rick Carlisle and company got going up there. But just kind of last thing on last night's game, I'll be honest with you, Brad. I was not familiar with, Aaron Naismith's game. Like, to see that he dropped third, like, I'm sorry I'm not familiar with your game, Aaron Naismith. Like, that was impressive to me.
Yeah, well, they all can't hit. I think he hit 5 threes in like a 4-minute span in the fourth quarter. So it was just one of those flammable runs that he can shoot and he can play. He's a good defender. He got the matchup on Brunson to start the game. He's a player, like a lot of the guys on the Pacers. But he's not that kind of player. You weren't missing these 30-point. If you haven't been watching Aaron Nesmith, you haven't been missing a lot of performances like that. But he is capable of getting hot, and he did last night. And again, it just feels like in these games, to me, the story of these playoffs, there's two of them. There's the physicality, which is allowing for the margins to shrink between teams. You can neutralize a better team easier when you can hold them and grab them and cut off their penetration, and you get some leeway with your physicality. You can play smaller lineups and battle for the boards with bigger guys because they'll allow you to get low, the way Caruso was allowed to guard Nikola Jokic in Game 7 of that series. So that's been one. That brings the teams closer together. And then two, the parity that's in the league, the superstars are so spread out. There is a guy like Tyrese Halliburton on the Pacers. There is a guy like Jalen Brunson on the Knicks. I think back to those teams where Paul George and Russell Westbrook were on the same team in Oklahoma City, or even for years up there in Portland with Damian Lillard and LaMarcus Aldridge, or Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum. In the 90s, those were finals teams. Like, all you had to have was two really good players, two all-star players, and you were competing for a title. Right. And now every team has two really good players.
True.
So these series are now more about your fourth player, your fifth player, your sixth player. The Suns found out we can have 3 Hall of Fame players, but if we don't have the fourth player, fifth player, sixth player, we don't even make the playoffs, let alone contend for a championship. And so the margins for these teams are no longer separated by just having 2 great players. Everybody has 2 great players. So you put the physicality and you put the depth of the talent pool together, and you end up with these tiny, tiny margins between even a 1 and an 8 seed. Memphis was giving Oklahoma City trouble before John Morant got hurt in the first round. There's not a huge difference between 1 and 8, let alone 3 and 4, Indiana and New York. Let alone 1 and 4, Denver and Oklahoma City that goes 7 games, or 2 and 7 with, Minnesota's a 6 seed. They're in the conference finals. They took out the 3 seed Lakers. They were a better team than the 3. The seeds you can almost throw out now. These teams are so closely competitive. The margins are so small that matchups, calls, injuries, all these things can swing a series, swing a game so easily that you're just waiting for that pin to drop. You're down 20 and it's like, we can come back on this team. You're down 2-0 in a series, we can come back on this team. There's no dominant team that doesn't give you any chance if they put you down. There's a lot of good teams, but a good team can get up 20 and blow the lead. A great team. The 2018 Warriors, you weren't going down 25 in 2 straight games and coming back to win. But the top teams now aren't that good anymore. The talent has been dispersed, and the margins have been really minimized.
For sure. Catching up with Brad Botkin from CBS Sports. And I think, I wonder, Brad, because I totally agree with you, where I think it's more important to have depth. And just kind of a quick follow-up on that, how much do you think the new CBA is a part of describing what you just laid out and how you have to build your team?
It's everything. There's only two ways to build your team now, and it's not my money, so I guess theoretically the owners could go and blow past the tax and take on all these roster building penalties that you incur when you go over the second apron. But it's done what it was intended to do, to make it either impossible to build a top heavy team in the first place, as the Suns found out. Mm-hmm. You want to go out and have three max players, fine. The back end of your rotation is going to suck, and by extension, so is your team. Or you can put a super, super expensive team together like the Celtics did, but it's only going to last a couple years, because as soon as contracts start coming due, you can't pay everyone and still stay under the second apron, which is almost too punitive to screw with. Even if you wanted to spend the tax money, which the tax money is absurd.
It is.
It starts getting to the point where it's like $7 on every dollar. Like you put like a $40 million contract ends up costing you $200 million. Oof. So it's really, really punitive. But then the roster building, where you can't aggregate in trades, you start losing draft picks. Like it just becomes unmanageable. And so if you can't go over that, you either can't do it in the first place, and you can't get a bunch of superstars, or you can, but you can only do it for 2 years. That's why you're not seeing these teams. That's why there's only been there's been no teams of the last 7 years to win a title a second time. All the past 7 years, you go back to Denver's 23, all the way back, the last team to win was 2018 Warriors. Since that finals, starting with the 2009 Raptors, no team, forget 2 in a row, no team has won 2 in a 7-year period, because you can't sustain it. You either can't build it in the first place, or you can, and you better capitalize on those 2 years that roster's together, because as soon as contracts start coming due, you can't pay everyone. You're going to see the Celtics this summer. They're going to have to get rid of Drew Holiday. They're going to have to get rid of Kristaps Porzingis. They were going to have to do that even before Tatum got hurt. So you either can't build the top-heavy roster in the first place, or you can't sustain it for very long. And that's almost the entire reason for the spreading out of talent.
It's absolutely fascinating to see, just how how the second apron does impact, because, I think you're absolutely spot on. And it's crazy to see kind of how these teams have to adjust. And this, you mentioned the changes coming to the Celtics. We're catching up with Brad Botkin here on the Rip City Drive. A couple more things for you, Brad. When I want to circle back to the Tyrese Halliburton trade, because at the time when that trade happened, it was like the general consensus, even after the Sacramento Kings made the playoffs, it was like, hey, maybe that's one of those rare win-win trades where both teams got what they wanted. An extended look, it kind of seems like the Kings are still kind of the Kings, and Halliburton's kind of ascending to star status. I know the Kings have a lot of things in their history they probably regret. Is this another one, Brad?
Yeah, it probably is. Halliburton's gotten too good, but you have to look at these trades through the prism of the time that they happened. Revisionist history is difficult. So at the time that trade went down, the Kings just wanted to be a good team. They wanted to get in the playoffs and not be a disaster. So long-term ceiling, Halliburton certainly gives you more upside, probably, maybe championship potential, than Sabonis. But at the time, Sabonis stabilized that team in connection with De'Aaron Fox. Remember, they already had De'Aaron Fox, so Halliburton's going to be a little bit of diminishing returns. He's not going to have the ball in his hands all the time, so a lot of that decision is made because you already have Fox. It's not made in a vacuum. So I do still think that was a win-win trade. But as more time goes on and Halliburton becomes a better player in Sabonis, and his teams continue advancing to the conference finals. That Kings team, they hadn't made the playoffs in 16 years. They finally did get in. They got a 3 seed. It's like better than they've been as long as anybody can remember. So that was their goal. And I think they achieved it. But as time goes on, yes, the more bitter pill to swallow for Sacramento is the reason that they didn't take all these really great, like unbelievable Hall of Fame point guards was because they already had one in house, right? The first one they passed on was Luka Doncic. Like they had the number 2 pick and they took Marvin Bagley.
Right.
So they don't take Luka Doncic. Then they get De'Aaron Fox and they get rid of Tyrese Halliburton because they have De'Aaron Fox. And then they lose De'Aaron Fox.
Right.
So they've had 3 probably Hall of Fame point guards. De'Aaron Fox is probably going to have a chance. 3, Doncic, Halliburton, and Fox in a small market where you can never attract those kinds of players, and they've had their hands on all of them. They actually had their hands on all of them and gave all 3 of them up. That's rough. It's the same thing with the Mavericks. I mean, Luka Doncic. I mean, at this point, are you more upset about losing Luka Doncic or Jalen Brunson? You know, they got rid of Jalen Brunson because they had Doncic, but now they don't have Doncic anymore. It's just amazing. These guys are franchise-changing players, and you can't just give them away. It's pretty wild.
Oh, it absolutely 100% is. And, you know, Brad, to your point, I absolutely love this revisionist history because I think the biggest one this week, again, if you go back into the nitty-gritty details of it, you know, you learned that, you know, Kawhi Leonard wasn't probably going to sign with the Clippers without them making the move for Paul George. But this week, when after Shea won MVP, I just like had a moment where I looked at myself and I was like, you know, imagine if you could have told Kawhi Leonard, hey, Kawhi, you know, this guy we got coming up is going to be MVP in a few years. Let's play you 40, 50 games a year, keep your knees good, and then you got an MVP. Obviously, super revisionist history, like you said, not realistic. But it's crazy that, like, the Clippers have to be having some, wow, we don't even have Paul George anymore. We didn't get a whole lot from Paul George, and we still owe picks, and that guy's the MVP now.
I know. The thing with that one is at least SGA was young, and you certainly didn't know. There's more trades like that where you can look at and say, you know, the guy just blossomed into something that, you know, that's sort of like saying, why didn't the first 14 teams pick Giannis?
Right.
You know,
that's
like
true.
you just it's a lot like that. So, you know, there's been a lot of trades like that, but the ones that where you sort of knew the deal and you thought you had something in house that you weren't going to retain anyway, those are the ones that are really tough to swallow. You know, SGA going off and becoming, but to the Thunder's credit, I mean, they got off a sinking ship at the perfect time where a lot of teams, you know, the Portland went through this. How long do you hang on to Dame? How long do you hang on to CJ? You know, they tried for so long because it is tough to put a duo like that together. And relatively speaking, they've been very successful with Terry Stotts. And it's like, when is enough of a sample period for you to finally pull the cord and say, this isn't going to win, you know? And so the Thunder, Durant left and they gave Westbrook a couple more years, and it's like, okay, we're not going to win with this. And then Paul George was there, and they saw, you know, a lot of teams would be very satisfied with a George Westbrook duo. Westbrook was an MVP player at that time, but you know what? We're not winning with this. Let's start the rebuild. They didn't wait for it to get so deep into the timeline that then they have no trade leverage. And they did it early. They got ahead of it, and they were able to attract a player like SGA ahead of time. If they wait 3 more years, SGA develops. They can't get him with that sort of package. And so you have to be ahead of these things. And so you court disaster by maybe doing it something too soon, by like, let's get rid of Halliburton. And then it blows up, you know. So it's very fine line, very tough job as a GM to figure out when is the right time to give up on, you know, a really good veteran duo that's been solid, but maybe not fully championship material. And how long do you hold on to a young player before you put him in a trade? The Warriors, they tried to hang on to Kuminga too long. They held on to James Wiseman too long. It's a really, really fine line to navigate. How long do you keep a young player to see what he's going to blossom into before or do you trade him early, you know, when teams are willing to bet on the potential? So it's difficult. And yeah, if you go back through NBA history, you're going to find whole bunch of teams that made trades too early, and it doesn't look good 10 years down the road.
No, it doesn't. Catching up with Brad Botkin here on from CBS Sports. Just a couple more questions for you, Brad. You know, obviously, you know, switching gears a little bit. I just want to get your take on that Thunder Timberwolves first game. Obviously, they got coming up game 2 here in just a little bit. Did that result kind of surprise you? I kind of thought the Thunder were favored going into that game, but it kind of flipped at halftime.
Yeah, no, it didn't surprise me just because the Thunder have a lot of elements. First of all, the Thunder are the best point differential of any team in NBA history. So as we sit here and talk about parity in this league, I've believed that the Thunder were more separated from the pack than I think perception was indicating. I think that we got a little bit too heavy with the, oh my God, the West is so stacked, anybody can win. I think the West is absolutely stacked from 2 down. I think Oklahoma City is clearly the best team, even though Denver took them 7. And I think they're the best team because of their defense. So think about this. In today's NBA, there's 2 spots on the court where you're going to get efficient offense, in the restricted area at the rim and behind the three-point line. The Thunder are the number 1 team at defending both. They're the best three-point defensive team, and they're the best rim protecting team. Okay? So if you can't score at the rim and you can't score behind the three-point line, you are forced to settle into these soft spot mid-range areas where nobody wants to make a full-time living at in today's game. Nobody. Even Kevin Durant's teams. Look at the Suns. They're trying to exist on 2 of the best mid-range players in history on the same team, and the math game catches up with you. Okay, so that's one thing. The Wolves had to take 51 three-pointers in that game. Now, there's a big difference between the 51 three-pointers that the Wolves took in that game and the damn near 50 that the Celtics averaged during the year. They had to take those 51 threes because the lane was so closed off. Those are desperation threes. Those are, we can't get anything else. Let's just chuck this up. And that's how you end up shooting the lowest percentage. If you look back at the stats of the Thunder during the regular season, they don't defend the three-point line by not allowing them in the first place. They actually, only 7 teams allowed more three-point attempts than the Thunder. They just contest them more. So they were 23rd in three-pointers allowed, but they're first in defensive three-point percentage. Why? Because they have all these long athletic defenders. Every modern defense's goal is to close down off the perimeter into the driving lanes, okay, cut off the drives, and then recover back out to the shooter when they kick it out. But that's in theory. In practice, most teams can't do it. You end up compromising one for the other. You come down to help, they kick it out. You don't get back out fast enough. It's an open 3. The Thunder do get back out fast enough. Alex Caruso, Lou Dort, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jalen Williams, Cason Wallace, all of these guys can close down your driving lane and then get back to the shooter. So time and time again, you just saw it in game 1. Anthony Edwards is trying to probe this sort of shell defense, and he's seeing nothing but clogged lanes. Oh, now, usually, okay, the lane's clogged, must be a shooter open.
Right.
Passes it, they're right back out to the shooter, taking a contested 3. And it's even more problematic for the Wolves because when Rudy Gobert's on the floor, they don't have to guard him. So that's 2 guys, Isaiah Hartenstein and Chet Holmgren, 2 7-footers who can just park at the rim. So now you've got all these unbelievable perimeter defenders flying at your shooters. And they can close out super aggressively because if you put it on the floor and go by them, you've got 2 7-footers just hanging out the rim because they don't have to respect Rudy Gobert on the perimeter. And so it just becomes an almost impenetrable defense for this particular matchup. So the Wolves tried to counter that by bringing Naz Reid in and at least having a shooter that Oklahoma City's big men would have to respect and come out of the paint, but Naz Reid was 0 for 7 from 3. So they're going to have to make a lot of shots to loosen up the teeth of that defense. And I don't think that they can do it over the long haul. They certainly didn't do it in game 1. And I think Oklahoma City is going to win this series in 5 or an easy 6-game series. 6 sounds tough, but I think this is the series where Oklahoma City kind of uses that Denver matchup to catapult them into, hey, we're the best team in the league, and we're certainly the best team remaining in these wild playoffs after Boston and Cleveland went out.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think the Thunder's at their depth. I think that in that defense,
that's right,
they just swarm. It's really good defense, and yeah, I couldn't agree more. And Brad, I appreciate the time, man. It was great to catch up. I know I'm usually doing the one booking you for Chad, but I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today, my friend. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
That was Brad Botkin from CBS Sports. It was great to catch up with Brad. So much good stuff there. I mean, I love to go back and look at these revisionist trades. I mean, like we said, Halliburton is continuing to go to star status. The Shea trade is fascinating to look at, and I agree with him. I think Minnesota has a chance in the series, but man, Oklahoma City is like a wave and waves and waves. They just keep coming at you. All right, just about done with the 4 o'clock hour. Got one more segment left up. Then we got Sean Highkin coming up, hour number 3. You've got the Rip City Drive on a Thursday. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on a Thursday afternoon. Hope everyone's having a great day. Big shout out to Brad Botkin for joining us last segment. It was fun to revisit some old trades with Brad, something we might even do this next hour with Sean Hyken as well. It's always fun to go back and look at these trades and be like, who's regretting it now? And man, the ascension of Tyrese Halliburton, it's got to be making the Kings definitely thinking a little bit about their past. But just a couple minutes here. Want to switch gears briefly before we take a break and come back the 5 o'clock hour with Sean Hyken. Want to switch gears, talk a little bit about the tush push. As we mentioned yesterday, it survived, and there was some audio I want to play with that. Let's start with Roger Goodell talking about the tush push, which, again, survived. It remains a legal play by a narrow margin of just 2 votes. Here's what Roger Goodell said.
We'll see how it plays out this season with some of the changes that Rich mentioned and the focus on the committee. And then we'll come back and we'll discuss those as we always do every year. What's the right way to go forward? So I think the discussion was helpful to us and what we want to focus on this season.
That was NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell talking about, just needing to take a look at the tush push. And then Rich McKay, who is the CEO for the Atlanta Falcons, had this to say with the votes not being there.
There's a lot of support for it, a lot of discussion about it. I've been in that room numerous times where we've had these types of discussions, and one team really, ends up being, in their mind, more impacted than others, but it still takes 24 votes. And in this case, those votes were not there.
More from Rich McKay talking about the tush push.
It's not disappointing for me, for our committee, for the committees that did the work, because it takes 24 votes to pass anything. And that is not, and we don't set a low bar. On this one, this was unanimously proposed by the Competition Committee, unanimously proposed by the Player Health and Safety Committee, and by the Owner Health and Safety Committee. So there's a lot of support for it, a lot of discussion about it. I've been in that room numerous times where we've had these types of discussions, and one team really, ends up being, in their mind, more impacted than others, but it still takes 24 votes. And in this case, those votes were not there.
So again, just talking a little about the tush push, I think there were some teams that were definitely clamoring for it to get banned. But again, CEO of the Falcons, Rich McKay, who sits on the Rules Committee for the NFL, just said the votes weren't there, and that's where we stand. All right, we'll go ahead and take a break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll be catching up with Sean Hyken. He's in studio. Got to get Sean's take on his trip to Chicago. Talking everything Blazers. We'll have a little fun, too. You've got the Rip City Drive final hour on a Thursday coming up. What's good, Rip City? Brendan Slaughter here for the Rip City Drive. The Indiana Pacers shocked the New York Knicks in overtime 138-135 as Tyrese Halliburton hits a shot to force OT before the Pacers took it home and a 1-0 lead. Tyrese led the way for the Pacers with 31 and 11, while New York had 43 from Jalen Brunson. Game 2 of the Western Conference Finals is tonight. OKC up 1-0, looking to go up 2-0 in Oklahoma City. Tip-off at 5:30 on ESPN. Trailblazers forward Toumani Camara has been named to the All-NBA second defensive team. It's the first all-defense nod for a Portland Trailblazers since 03-04 Theo Ratliff. The college football playoff has approved a new seeding model where the top 4 teams will be the top 4 seeds with byes, and the Denver Nuggets have removed the interim tag from David Adelman. He will be their next head coach. Coming up, excited for the 5 o'clock hour. We got Sean Highkin in studio. We're going to be getting into a whole bunch of different stuff. You got the Rip City Drive. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on a Thursday afternoon. Still cloudy. It's been cloudy all week. I don't expect the weather to change at this point. Keep thinking it's going to look out and see sun. But, this time I looked out and looked to my left, and I see my good friend Sean Highkin here in studio with us. Sean, welcome back from Chicago, man. It's great to talk to you again for a second time in a week.
Yeah, no, it's good to be back in the studio.
How was the trip? You and I talked a little bit. You mentioned the Beyonce concert at Soldier Field. That looked like it was a good time. But just overall, how nice was it? And how long were you out there for?
I was there for about 10 days. And so it was good. And you got to remember, I used to live there for 4 years. So there was obviously it was a work trip. And so I spent a lot of time, at the gym doing combine stuff. And then also I was at the lottery and all that kind of stuff. But then, you're also, you got to see there, like I have a lot of friends out there that I wanted to see and places I wanted to eat and all that kind of stuff. So, it was a good trip. It's always good to get back out there. That's one of the trips on the NBA calendar that I look forward to every year for sure.
Yeah, no, for sure. And so how much time did you spend back there? So that was before you came out here to Portland and were you working for Bleacher Report at the time too?
For part of it. And then I was the Bulls beat writer for The Athletic back when The Athletic first started. And they were just a startup, and Chicago was the only market that they were in.
Oh, interesting. Gotcha. Yeah. So you have, but are you, remind me where you're from? You're from
I
here,
grew
right?
up in Portland.
Oh,
yes.
okay. Gotcha. So you made your way to Chicago. So I'm assuming you still had some friends back there.
Oh, yeah.
Got some chance to have a little downtime, spend some time with friends.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I kind of stayed the extra 2 days on the beginning and end of the actual events that I was there to cover.
Nice. Got you. And then that Beyonce concert.
Yeah.
I mean, that you ran down. We talked last Friday. You talked about it a little bit, but the floor is now yours, Sean. Like, how awesome was that?
It was pretty incredible. I mean, this was not the first time I've seen her. I saw her about 10 years ago when I lived in Chicago, also at Soldier Field.
Nice.
That was when Lemonade was out, and so this was obviously this show was like it was very much based on the Cowboy Carter stuff. So it was a lot of those songs and just the staging that she built for it. And again, I think I talked about it the last time, but the show got delayed by 3 hours because there was a tornado warning.
Crazy.
And then and not only was there a tornado warning, there was an actual tornado.
Oof.
And then it kind of subsided by about 9:30. She comes on at 10:30, goes until 1. But there's a part of the show where she's on this like giant horseshoe that's like flying around the whole stadium. And the fact that, you're trying that after a tornado is pretty insane.
Yeah, no, I bet that was a fun experience. And, Soldier Field, obviously, like, it seems to be really popular with concert artists now, Sean. It's like everyone wants to do the stadium tour. I don't necessarily know where that started or who kind of kicked it off, but, now you've seen everyone from Taylor Swift to Morgan Wallen to, Beyonce. It's like everyone seems to want to go in stadiums now. Is it simply because you can hold more than like a Moda Center, obviously, or do you think it's just like the atmosphere?
Well, it kind of goes, obviously, like the Beatles playing Shea Stadium back in the 60s was obviously the first real big one. But, there are just certain artists, the ones that you named that can do that. Or, if somebody doesn't tour that often, and they're a big enough draw that like they're going to, that's kind of where you're going to play. It's kind of funny. Like I'm lucky I got to see this Beyonce show in Chicago because there is nowhere she could play in Portland.
Right.
She couldn't, like, maybe I don't even think she's going to Seattle on this tour, but she could go to Seattle.
Right.
That's the closest anybody's going to get. And so, there are certain artists at that level. Like, I know the Kendrick Lamar tour that's out right now, that's in stadiums too. So there are some that, you're just not going to, be able to do. But back when I lived in Chicago, I saw some shows out at Soldier Field, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's cool though, because like to your point, like, like this, for example, like I wanted to see Morgan Wallen this summer and he's doing a stadium tour, nowhere coming in Portland, in Seattle. And those tickets were just absolutely through the roof. I'm like, okay, maybe next time. Or, for example, like Post Malone's got his stadium tour I'm trying to go to because they have one of their concerts at Providence Park.
Yeah.
But even still, to your point, like, I think you can kindly say Providence Park is kind of more of a soccer stadium. It's not like Providence Park is a, quote, NFL
It
stadium.
doesn't hold 80,000 people like some of these other stadiums do. Yeah.
And I think sometimes you just that's the one thing with Portland is you sometimes see the artists who want to do more than the whatever Moda holds, 19 somehow,
something like that.
Yeah. So nevertheless, was very curious because that would be a concert I'd be highly intrigued. So I'm glad you had a good time there, Sean. But also, let's dive into the nitty gritty of the lottery itself. Was this the second or third straight year you were in the room for the lottery drawing?
It was the third time.
Okay.
I was in there for the Wemby lottery where they came within one digit of getting Wemby, but then they ended up moving up because I think that year they had the fifth worst record in the league. So they actually did jump up to 3 when they ended up with the third pick where they got, which ended up being the Scoot draft. And then I was in there last year when they had the 4th worst record and they fell back 3 spots to number 7. And then this year they were 10th and they fell back to 11th, and Dallas got the bailout with the Cooper Flag lottery. So
I mean, it's one of those things where it's really nice, Sean, because like when we first talked even last week, people were still heavy on the conspiracy theories, and it was nonstop forever. And then talking to you, talking to Keith Smith this week, and it's like it really sounds like you would have to get so many people in on it. Not only, and I'm sure I was going to ask you about this too. He mentioned that the security is pretty tight at the lottery as well. So you clearly got to bribe the security people too. So, I mean, it's just so unrealistic. I think it's crazy that the Mavericks won, but I don't think you can sit here and peddle conspiracy theories.
It's pretty wild that that's what ended up happening. And I think I said this last week when I was on here, but to me, if they were going to rig it, the team to do that for would have been Chicago, because that's the market that I think that, it's the 3rd biggest market after LA and New York. The Bulls haven't really been relevant at all since Michael Jordan, except for like those 2 years where Derrick Rose was healthy before he started getting hurt. And if the NBA were going to put their thumb on the scale to say, hey, we'd like to get, this next, generational star in this market or that market, then, Chicago, I think, would have been the one that they would do it for. But I mean, I think really all the proof you need is that New Orleans got the Zion Williamson year. The Knicks had, and the Knicks and the Lakers were both in the top 4. Like, couldn't they have, like, if that's really what they were doing, would they have done that?
Oh yeah, no, that's where my thought went immediately, because I mean, if they were wanting to rig things, I remember like the Knicks really thought they were getting Zion. Like it was,
I think Zion thought that they were getting Zion.
Right. And, to your point, like, I don't think, if the NBA was really choosing, I mean, I know everyone goes, oh, the 90s, the cold envelope, David Stern and the Patrick I wasn't around then, Sean, so I can't speak to it.
That was before I was born,
right,
too,
so I can't speak to that. But as far as recently, I can be like, I don't think the NBA, like, Zion other than Cooper Flag, like, in my opinion, it's kind of like LeBron, Zion, and then Cooper Flag is like, and Wemby, of course.
Wemby, I think, might be the one.
He might be. You're absolutely right. But, like, not too many guys we were just like, oh, my gosh, this is a lock-stop number 1 franchise player.
Right.
And I don't think if the NBA was going to choose, they would have chose to send him to New Orleans. So that to me, back whenever that lottery was, well, I was like, okay, yeah, it's not rigged because he's going to New Orleans. And I don't think anybody saw that. And I think, as crazy as it sounds, Sean, like, you almost just have to say, like, the Mavericks just, maybe they made a deal with the devil, man. Like, you never know, right? Like, it's just, I don't believe it was rigged, but man, it just, I still don't really believe it.
Like I said last week, we all just kind of started laughing when they called it out. we were all trying to kind of figure out what it was. Like they gave us these little cheat sheets where they have all 1,000 combinations, and so we're kind of like looking through. Once they call all four of the numbers out and the combinations, we're like looking on our things, trying to figure out what it is. And I don't even think I looked at the Dallas part.
Oh.
I just was like, okay, you know, this close to Portland, but it's not Portland. Is it Chicago? Is it Phoenix, which would have gone to Houston? Is it any of those? And then when they call out Dallas, we all just kind of throw our hands up, and they're just like, there's no way there's no way that just happened.
I think as I was telling you, Sean, I had a pina colada in one hand, and I had my phone in the other, sitting poolside in Las Vegas when this. And I swear, you know, in a place in Vegas, you got TVs and people watching things outside. The amount of like, and maybe things I can't say on the radio that were uttered when Dallas won, I was like, I just tuned in because, you know, I'm sitting there on vacation. I'm like, maybe the Blazers win the lottery. You never know, right?
Yeah.
When in reality, I love talking to you now in hindsight, because I'm sitting there waiting. In my head, I'm sitting there going, Sean Highkin already knows.
I knew the results for an hour before they showed it on TV, which is why it was really funny to watch the reveal on TV.
I bet.
Because I think the really funny part about the reveal, so the first two teams that they called out were Dallas and San Antonio. Both of those teams had worse odds than Philadelphia.
Right.
And in the room, we were like, okay, wow, Philadelphia might lose their pick if they drop back 2 spots, because their pick was top 6 protected and they were in the 5th spot. And then Philly got called out for the 3rd pick. So we all kind of knew that, you know, we all knew going in that, you know, that Philly was going to end up with the 3rd pick.
Right.
And so then we were like watching it. And normally, you know, the 2 years before this that I had done that, you know, they do the actual lottery, which takes maybe like 5 or 10 minutes to actually do the drawing. And then we all have to stay in there until they finish doing the TV broadcast, because then once they've announced it on TV and the whole world knows, then they let us out and give us our phones back. So, you know, after they do the actual drawing, we all are kind of just milling around in this lottery room with no access to our phones, no way to communicate with the outside world for like an hour until they show the thing on TV. And obviously they have TVs in there that are showing what they're showing on ESPN with the broadcast. And usually it's just kind of background noise. But this year we were all just, because the idea of the Mavericks winning the lottery was just so crazy to all of us. We were all just like, I need to see how this plays on TV. I need to see what the reaction is on ESPN. And so there was this part where they call out that, that like, and this means that Philadelphia loses its pick. And we're all just start laughing because we know that didn't actually happen. And then they corrected themselves later.
Yeah, no, it's definitely fascinating. And one thing I want to get on the other side of our break here, Sean, again, Sean Highkin from the Rose Garden Report joining us here, is like, so like, I would just be curious, like, if it, like, does the, like, when you go in that room and you say they hold you, is the NBA like legitimately like have like a big like dude at the door saying you guys like can't leave kind of a thing?
There's a lot of security presence, and it's very like, if you need to use the bathroom, do it now, because otherwise, they have us go through metal detectors. We have to put all of our belongings in a envelope or so that with our name on it, so that we can't, we don't have our phones, we don't have our, if you have a watch, you have even like a digital recorder for audio.
Yeah.
Even if it isn't internet connected and has no way of transmitting, but even like my AirPods, I had to put in. They're so like, you can't, they don't want anything in there.
Interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating, because it almost kind of feels like, going through TSA, but maybe times about like 10, right?
Yeah.
Where they're like, hey, we're going to make sure no one's going to spoil it here on social media. But, we'll continue our conversation with Sean on the other side of the break and the whole 5 o'clock hour. Obviously, catching up with him from his time in Chicago. We'll maybe take a look at maybe some players that are mocked around the 11th spot this year. Also, we'll check in with Sean about just what he thinks about the team and entering the summer as well. And then we'll maybe talk a little NBA playoffs as too. Sean, I have to say before we go to break, I still can't believe how quickly Michael Malone got a job. Like, after postseason, he gets let go from the Nuggets, and everyone's like, Michael Malone's kind of this rigid, tough guy, not easy to talk to, and now he's on TV. Like, how does that make sense?
Those TV jobs are always going to be there for guys who were coaches for. Like, Tom Thibodeau was on, like, right after he got fired from the Bulls, he was covering he was doing the TV for ESPN briefly.
I guess it pays to be a coach because it's like, hey, you get fired. It's like, hey, here's another gig. Not bad. All right, you've got the Rip City Drive. Brendan Slaughter, Sean Hyken in studio. We're back in a few minutes. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on a Thursday afternoon. Hope everyone's having a good Thursday so far. Please do continue to have Sean Hyken in studio. Sean, appreciate you taking the time, man. Let's just keep our conversation going. It was awesome, their first segment. But before we kind of dive into some specific Blazer stuff, just your thoughts so far on these conference finals as we've seen, like the Thunder kind of cruise to that Game 1 win, and Tyrese Halliburton, man, just can't say enough about that kid.
Yeah, so I didn't actually see that game live last night. I had other plans, but I just, I was at a bar where like the game was kind of on the TV, and so I was like kind of glancing at it, and it was like, okay, the Knicks are up 10, the Knicks are up. They just kind of stayed up 10, and then I was, by the time the game ended, I was somewhere else where there wasn't a TV, and I just kind of, because I think the last time I checked on it, there was like 3 minutes left and the Knicks were up 12 or something like that. And so I just assumed that the Knicks won. And then I started getting texts about like, oh my gosh, the pace, Halliburton hits the shot. And then it's like he hits the shot they thought it was a game winner. And then he sent it, but then his foot was on the line. So they said, he ended up going to overtime. And like he did the choke sign, like he did the celebration thinking that it was going to be, the game winner, and then it ended up not. And so that could have blown up in his face if it was premature. I obviously, like, once I got home last night, I kind of caught up on all the highlights and now I kind of know what went on there. But yeah, that was crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you mentioned that, Sean, because I want to get your take on that. But real quick, here's what Tyrese Halliburton said about that choke gesture.
I wasn't like plotting on it or anything. Everybody wanted me to do it like last year at some different point, but it's just got to feel right. And it felt right at the time. If I would have known it was a 2, I would not have done it. So I think I might have wasted it. If I do it again, then people might say I'm like aura farming. So I'm not, I don't plan on using it again.
So
I just recently found out what aura farming is.
Explain if it's radio appropriate.
It's basically just clout chasing.
Okay, gotcha.
That's basically what it is. Like,
interesting. So yeah, I mean, again, when I saw it, I thought, and I know, Sean, there's some times where, I could understand where maybe, some people didn't love the gesture, but when I saw it, I was like, wow, like when you're on the road and you hit a shot like that, it's no different than, I think back to, in a way, in a kind of way, like Dame waving goodbye to Thunder.
Yeah.
Right? Or, dare I say, throughout time, I'm trying to think of who else had like a pretty big like celebration after a shot, but those are just the two that come to mind.
Oh, like Steph doing the night-night thing.
That's a good one too. Yeah. And, I don't think that's like bad. I think that's just like the competition of sports. And if the shoe fits that's the point, is like, I don't think that, not to take anything away from the Pacers, Sean, but I think this is clearly one the Knicks choked, and call a spade a spade,
They
right?
did. They did. They were, and, with Halliburton doing that celebration, I think it was also, the fact that, the Knicks and there aren't really that many rivalries in the NBA these days because players move around so much that it's like not really, that kind of isn't really there in the way that it was maybe 20, 30 years ago. Knicks Pacers, because of the stuff in the 90s and the history and all that stuff, is one of the few that, especially like in playoff time, like those fan bases still hate each other. And also just the fact that Reggie Miller was calling the game for TNT, and he was the one that did the choke sign originally. Like it was, I thought it was pretty cool. And I think you can say in retrospect it was cool because the Pacers ended up winning the game. But if he had done that, and then his foot was on the line, it went to overtime, and then the Knicks won, then you look kind of silly. But it didn't end up blowing up in his face.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like the same thing. Same thing. I love players who have that just utmost level of confidence, and it's like, I'm going to do this and what have you. And I made the comparison back when we started the show, Sean, is the way that Halliburton's shot went up. It reminded me of Dame's shot in the bubble, where it just went like 8 feet in the air and just straight down. I'm like, I'm no geometry expert and angles and all that. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that was not a very high likelihood of probability.
No.
And and I'll say this too, is like, I think everybody in these Final Four, Sean, are cool stories. And I even talked to Travis Demers earlier this week, and he was amped to have his Knicks be.
I haven't texted. I got to text Travis now and see if he's holding up okay after that.
We probably need to do a welfare check.
I should check on him.
We probably need to do a welfare check on TD, because he was so ready for the start of this series. And I think everybody has a cool story, Sean, but I'm having a really hard time not being like, man, the Pacers might just be like the funnest, coolest story to root for out of these 4 teams.
The thing I like about the Pacers, obviously, like Halliburton's awesome, so they they have that like A1 star talent
Sure.
type of guy. I like the way that team has been built
Yeah.
in the sense that they never like, you look at like, Minnesota, was terrible for all these years and they get the number 1 pick, they get Anthony Edwards. Oklahoma City, they got all million picks, they traded for SGA, but they were, they really bottomed out. They really tanked for a couple of years. The Pacers never bottomed out.
No.
They kind of did that build from the middle type of thing where, and they did get very lucky with like, they did that trade with a Sabonis for Halliburton trade, and then it turns out that maybe the Kings undervalued Halliburton a little bit, and it turns out he's actually an All NBA top 10 player in the league type of guy, maybe significantly a better player than Sabonis is, even though Sabonis is an All Star.
Yeah,
they never they just kind of added like they were smart with like how they did the role players, like with Neesmith, with Nembhard, with Miles Turner's just kind of been there forever. And he's like he's they just that team was just built well. They never did the we're just going to tank for a draft pick and then hope we get lucky with that. And I mean they had some top 10 picks. They had like Matherin, who's plays for them.
That was a Shaden year.
That was the Shaden year. But then also like Jarris Walker was their last top 10 pick. He doesn't even really play for them.
No,
So
didn't play. Yeah.
So I don't know. I like the way that team was built. I like the way that team kind of.
I think it should. Yeah, I think it should give the Blazers some hope, Sean, because I think it's very similar in the sense of like, I could be wrong, maybe speaking out of pocket, but just from my perspective, it's like I think Indiana has a lot of the similar challenges that Portland has. I don't think you're always going to get big time free agents to go to. I think it's still kind of a relatively medium-ish market.
Right.
Kind of can be forgotten about a little bit, and I think in this case, with who they played, like, I don't think anybody expected them to beat the Cavs. So I think people just wrote them off like, oh, they beat Day and injured.
I don't know. I kind of saw some stuff before that series about like, hey, the Pacers could give the Cavs a little bit. It wasn't necessarily a foregone conclusion. I think most people were picking the Cavs.
Sure.
But I don't think it was this insane upset that the Pacers. But then obviously with the Cavs, like all of their guys got hurt in that series. So
injuries matter, and to that point, like I can't remember if it was. I don't believe it. I think it was a deadline ago. They made the move for Pascal Siakam.
Yeah.
And I don't like. I remember it being just like, oh yeah, they got Siakam.
They also didn't give up that much for Siakam. They gave up a couple of firsts and
Bruce Brown,
like salary. It wasn't.
Right.
It wasn't this like they gave up 6 first-round picks and all these. They didn't give up nearly as they didn't give up as much as the Knicks gave up for Mikal Bridges.
No. And that's shocking to me because it's like okay, they just kind of quietly got Siakam who. Hey, he's the guy on the roster with championship experience. I know it's, overused, but you have Siakam, you have Carlisle, who's, I think their 2011 championship is one of the better coaching jobs we've seen. And, I think all 4 of these teams, like especially when you consider that the Thunder don't recognize the Sonics' history, none of them have a championship except for the Knicks, and that's, back in the early 70s.
Early 70s, yeah.
So the story is cool, but man, like, could you imagine if, like, if it's like a Thunder Pacers finals or even a Timberwolves Pacers final?
Be pretty cool.
Like, who would have called so much money you could have made in Vegas on that matchup, Sean?
Yeah.
It's just crazy. I mean, and I think injuries have had a part of it, but why do you think there's been so much parity in the NBA playoffs? Is it the second apron catching up to teams a little bit, and we're seeing like team like the Pacers that have depth, be able to go further? Like, what do you think it kind of is for this grouping? Because outside of OKC, I don't think any of these teams were really picked to make it this far.
It's a number of things. I think part of it is that this, the new CBA and the second apron kind of legislates out, teams with super high payrolls just, being able to buy their way to, contention every year. That's part of it. And then, I mean, there is part of it that is just, injuries. Like, I don't think the Knicks would have beaten the Celtics if Jason Tatum hadn't torn his Achilles. I think everybody kind of thought that, like, Jason, even though the Cavs had a better record, I think more people were picking the Celtics coming into the playoffs because the Celtics won last year and they, were awesome in the first round of the playoffs. And it was just, it seemed like it was just kind of, everybody kind of trusted their system and they were just so efficient in the regular season.
Deep. Yeah.
They were deep. But then, Jason Tatum tears his Achilles, then it's like, okay, that's that series. And then, it's, I think it's a combination of injuries because the Bucks were done after Dame tore his Achilles, and then there was all in some of these other series, like It's just like the Nuggets just like didn't have enough outside of
Right.
Jokic, and then like Aaron Gordon was playing hurt in that last game, and it's just. I think it's just it's a combination of injuries, but then it's also like I think this is what the league wants. Like the
They do.
league has kind of legislated out dynasties now, which you can land wherever you want to land on, whether that's good or bad. But it's kind of interesting that that's just the way it's shaken out.
Yeah, I mean, again, when I was talking with, Brad Botkin last hour from CBS Sports, he's like, regardless of the Tatum injury, like Boston's going to have to move pieces, right? Like you're just seeing like you can build a super expensive roster, but you can't keep it for more than just a couple years before you start running into punitive,
Right.
kind of, I don't even want to say damages, but just punitive roster anti-building
Decisions they
right, that hamper your ability moving forward. And I mean, I guess that's kind of like I think about that with the Thunder. Like, you saw with SGA winning MVP. Like I saw something, Sean, that if he works it right, he can he can be that player that gets almost up to 80 million annually.
Yeah.
And you're just like 80 like,
Those numbers are only going to go up in the coming years, by the way, because of this new TV deal that's kicking in. And they did this thing where, because remember in 2016, the last time they signed a new TV deal, and there was just that huge cap spike, which is how the Warriors were able to just get
it's
Durant.
like fit into Durant, $35 million.
Which the Blazers, that was the summer the Blazers signed like Evan Turner and Allen Crabbe. Basically, the whole league lost their minds that summer, but that was because the players union voted to have the whole cap spike go into effect in one summer
all in once,
and not smooth it out. In the current CBA, or when they did this thing, they're kind of smoothing it out where they're like artificially not inflating it by as much as it's
Makes
going.
sense.
So, but basically what that means is that the cap can go up by a maximum of 10% every year, but it's going to go up that maximum 10% every year. Like
Right.
it's going to, so every year from now to the end of this TV deal, pretty much the salary cap is going to be 10% higher than it was the previous year.
Okay.
So these numbers are going to only go. So when you say, that number, just like your eyes like bug out of your head when you hear like SGA might be making $80 million a year. By the time Victor Wembanyama is up for his, even past the rookie max, his like second max contract, we could be talking about like $100 million a year guy. Like,
I mean, it's crazy because I remember for a brief time, Sean, like it was kind of, I don't know, I thought it was kind of cool when like, Dame was at the top of the league as far as like, it's like, oh, cool. Like Dame, like no one's, and you thought like whatever that was, I can't remember the number, but you're like 50-some million, like, okay, that's a lot. Then you're like, well, if SGA, does the math and I don't know all the extension 4 and 5, all that, but they're like, he could get close to 80 million annually. And you look at like the Thunder, that's why I'd say like even their window, like people are like, hey, the Thunder are young. They're going to be great for the next 15 years. Well, they probably will have a pretty good core, but like you can't afford to pay Shea, Chet, Jalen Williams, Lou. Like eventually they will have to, moves. You can, what is it now? 3 players you can keep on max roughly?
if you really want to like limit yourself to basically only being able to use, minimums to the thing that the Thunder, I think, have that these other teams don't have are that they have so many future draft picks that, they have so many more future picks than everybody. But they've also done a really good job of using those picks, like Cason Wallace, who's one of their rotation players. That was the 14th pick in the draft a couple of years ago, and he's a good role player. And, like, you trust their track record to just find, they have all these draft picks, which, everybody talks about, like, oh, you can use these draft picks to trade for a star, or you can use them to just fill out your rotation with good young players on cheap contracts if you trust their scouting acumen, which I think Sam Presti has shown that he's done a really good job of drafting those types of guys and finding that type of talent on the margins. And then when some of these other guys like an Isaiah Joe or an Aaron Wiggins or something like that gets too expensive, they can just ship them out and they got a new one to plug in.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Sean, in a bit of a way, it sounds like Sam Presti like grew up playing like my GM in 2K. Like it literally is like
could have been
where it's like, hey, okay, like we have SGA, and I would say as I look at it, it seems like SGA, Jalen Williams, and Chet is probably their quote core that they won't move, but
eventually they might even have to trade J-Dub. I don't know.
Right. So nothing's guaranteed, but it's like in that same token, it's like you have such a like I looked at it yesterday to see Sean how many picks are still incoming to the Thunder for that SGA deal.
Yeah.
Like okay, let's just say this. Say the Thunder or the Clippers were paid up in full, and they didn't owe any more, and they're like, all right, well, we paid you in full. Fine, now he's MVP. For him to be MVP and then still owe more, like that's gonna hurt. Like I mean, again, I can't say I know too many Clippers fans, Sean. I don't know how many of them actually exist, but it's gotta hurt.
The Clippers have actually done a pretty good job though building a decent team without any of that. I mean, part of it helps that they're the team in LA that people are always going to want to play in LA, and it's always the team that, like, if the Lakers don't have space for you, then you can go to the Clippers. But, that front office, I think, has done a pretty good job of, you look at, a guy like Norm Powell, who I think was not really used the right way here in Portland, but he was undervalued. He goes to LA, has a career year this year. Zubac has gotten a lot better. They've done a really good, and obviously Ty Lue's one of the best coaches in the league. So like they've done a really good job of, with all that limited assets and all the stuff that they have, from that Paul George, Kawhi Leonard thing. They have done a good job of kind of staying competitive and not being in a position where they traded all their picks and they have no hope. We're just kind of where a team like Phoenix is right now.
Yeah, that's a good point. And this is purely, Sean, just a fun exercise to look back in hindsight, because the parameters of how it worked, it's not realistic. But if you could go back in a time machine, and because it was very clear, Kawhi Leonard's like, I will sign with you if you go get me Paul George. Or I think it was like Paul George equivalent, someone along those lines. But like, considering how Kawhi is still, maybe not MVP level, but still at a decent enough level where they think they can compete, and he's had some off years, like, just, is there a world, a universe, Sean, where Steve Ballmer, went to Kawhi Leonard's like, hey, just come on in. We got this young point guard. Just chill out for a few years. You play like 40 games a year. We'll go easy on those knees. And then you still have all those assets that you didn't have, because how much did they really get out of Paul George?
Well, look, this is one of those things, like, yes, in hindsight,
like,
yeah,
it's
obviously,
silly,
but,
for sure.
But like Paul George, you have to remember, Paul George was coming off of an MVP. I think he was finished like third or fourth in MVP voting that year. That was the first Giannis MVP year. I think Paul George came in third in MVP that year.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So that was a time not only that, but there was also there was no thought that Paul George was going to be on the market. Like he had just re-signed in Oklahoma City the previous summer. So everyone kind of thought he was just going to be there for the long haul. He had a really good year there. Obviously they lose to Portland in the first round of the playoffs, but then it's like, I guess at that point, that trade is, you're not trading for Paul George. You're trading for Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, because Kawhi is not coming unless you get PG.
Right.
So obviously it didn't work out because Kawhi was not able to stay healthy and PG kind of started, declining. Yeah. But I'm not going to sit here and say that it wasn't worth the gamble at the time. And the other thing is, like, people did not, like, SGA had a good year as a rookie. 11
points per game.
He had a good year as a rookie with the Clippers. Nobody, I think, thought he was. I've never talked to Sam Presti about this, but like, I'll bet even when they traded for SGA, they did not think he was going to be an MVP.
Yeah, see, that's the question. If I was at that press conference and I could talk to Sam Presti, one of the first questions, like, you knew, right? You had to know.
I don't think he did.
I mean, it's crazy, and if so, like, what a move, right? And it's just one of those things that I found super fascinating, because, Sean, you hear it all, being here Blazer fans, like, you've heard the Blazer fans, groan as, Jermaine O'Neal's traded away, becomes an all-star somewhere else, right? You've heard the Patty Mills, right, goes and, not at all, but, just solid player somewhere else. I'm just saying, from the perspective, like, if it was the Trailblazers and it was them in that situation, like, and then there was an MVP, like, imagine if Jermaine O'Neal went to go be like an MVP, right?
Yeah.
So, in that sense, like, the Kings have to feel real bad about Halliburton, and I just wonder if, even though they pivoted, the Clippers are still maybe kicking themselves a little bit, going, that was an MVP right there.
If there had been a way for them to get Kawhi without having to also get Paul George, maybe that's something, in retrospect, knowing how good SGA was going to become, that you try to do. But I don't think there was any. I think at the time it was pretty clear that, like, they weren't getting Kawhi unless they.
And you take a swing, right? You want to make Kawhi happy, and Kawhi was, as we know, coming off a championship.
Yeah.
So
you take a swing, but that doesn't mean the swing is always going to hit.
Right, and I think that's the key, right? Because you always hear, take the big swing, take the big swing. Big swing can also hurt the other way, too. We'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll wrap up the final hour with Sean Highkin. We'll talk a little bit more, keep the conversation going. You've got the Rip City Drive on a Thursday. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on a Thursday afternoon. Western Conference Finals Game 2 is underway. We're early. It's just 2-2 as we are dealing with a break for a Scott Foster bloody nose, Sean. So you and I chuckled about that a little bit. I'm sure some people who are watching the game chuckled a little bit too. But nevertheless, just want to get your thoughts on a couple Blazer-related things as we close out the show. And appreciate your time, Sean. Mm-hmm. Just for those who are kind of curious, like, what do you see as this timeline? You know, obviously
for the sale.
Yes, obviously Jody Allen and the Blazers put out the PR package last week that it would be, put up for sale, but I don't think the casual fan really knows the process. So, like, where does it start and how long do you think it'll take?
From what I've heard and from kind of what I've been able to glean from talking to a few people kind of around that side of the organization, it sounds like the expectation, and this is not, this could be give or take on either end of it. It could take shorter than this. It could take longer than this. But it sounds like just as a general time frame, the expectation is that it's going to be between 9 and 12 months until they announce a buyer or they agree on a buyer or announce a buyer. So the early end of the timeline could be maybe around the All-Star break in February, which is around 9 months from now. I mean, that was the timeline for the Celtics sale that just happened. They announced on July 1st of last year that the Celtics were going to be for sale, and then they had this March they announced who the buyer was going to be. So that's about 9 months, because and then once they have a buyer, like it's going to take them that 9 to 12 months to find a buyer, and then once they have an agreement in place between the estate and whoever the new buyer is or the new group or whoever that may be. Sure. And by the way, it's still way too early to really know who may or may not be involved, other than we know about Phil Knight not being involved, but it's, once they have the agreement in place, then it has to get voted on by the NBA's Board of Governors by a 3/4 majority. So 23 out of the 30 teams have to vote to approve the purchase. And usually that's a formality. Usually, if it gets to the point where they have an agreement in place, that means that the NBA's finance committee has already vetted the person and there's already whatever concerns they have been addressed. And so once it gets to the point, then it's usually like it'll get approved, no problem. But it's still steps that have to be taken. The estate, whoever, the investment bank and the law firm that they announced are running their the sale process, they're going to be meeting with different groups and deciding, whether it's to the highest bidder or, a combination of factors. They got to decide on a buyer, they got to decide on a price, all that kind of stuff. And then once they have the agreement, then it has to get approved
by the NBA.
Yeah, by the Board of Governors.
Okay. So, like I said, it's a process, right? It's not as simple as, posting something on Craigslist and being like, hey, come buy it, right?
No.
And just to be clear, so obviously they're not going to be the Celtics. Celtics went for something like $6 billion. But do you think something in like the 3.5 to 5 range is probably where it's going to land? Or am I even undershooting it a little bit?
I'm expecting it to be at least 4.
Okay. Yeah.
Because so you're just going, and obviously these lists are very inexact, but there's 3 outlets, like, reputable, outlets that cover this stuff that every year release their list of like which NBA teams are worth what. And that's Forbes, Sportico, and CNBC. All of them had the Blazers as worth somewhere between 3.5 and 3.6 billion. And these lists usually, by the time that they, when one of these teams gets sold, the number that they have on there is pretty conservative.
Okay.
Like with the Celtics, they said it was, these 3 lists said that it was between 5.5 and 6 billion.
Okay.
And then the total valuation ended up being closer to 7. Okay. So if they're saying right now that the team is worth 3.5 to 3.6, I think 4 is probably the baseline of what to expect.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And obviously, like Sean said, it's going to be a process and we're going to have to get there. But something we're going to be definitely checking in on often with him, because it's big news, folks. And other big news is that's going to do it for us here on the show today. Really appreciate